Hello and welcome to Writing Today. My name is Matthew and I'm going to be talking about post-apocalyptic novels. More specifically, how to write them. First of all, I'd like to thank those who've been supporting my books. In my last video I talked about the release of Dust as well as Cryptic Pines, and you guys showed a lot of support, which I really appreciate. If you are interested in checking out these novels, you can find them on my personal bookstore. You can also grab the first book in the Dust series for free. Now, there are all sorts of post-apocalyptic novels that we can talk about, and I'm going to be delving into the 5 most popular subgenres of this subgenre of science fiction. So let's talk about the very first one, and probably the most common one that you might be familiar with, and that is a dystopian apocalypse. Dystopian apocalypses tend to focus on a society that has collapsed. It has a new oppressive regime that has taken over, and it's keeping the people underfoot. As a result, you have people fearing for their lives, trying to survive, while at the same time they are being taken advantage of, used or killed by their new overlords. Examples of this are 1984 by George Orwell and A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is one of the most popular forms of post-apocalypse, as this tends to either have humans taking control of people, robots, or perhaps an alien species. But in this situation, it is the humans that tend to revolt and try to take back their world space and their freedom. Often this means fighting against the regime at a great cost. Typically, these stories will focus on the broader lesson of what is humanity and what we need to do as people today to avoid the similar fate in the story. So it's very much looking at a bigger picture than it is looking at individual characters in this subgenre of post-apocalypse. That's not to say you can't create a story that focuses on the characters, but as this is a post-apocalypse that seems the most likely when it comes to looking at our society today, it would also be a big miss not to focus on the lessons and morals that are often displayed in dystopian societies and comparing them with our own today. One additional tip that I can give you when writing this kind of story is to focus on the more realistic aspects of the world space and how this post-apocalypse came about. And yes, while it is interesting to focus on these new interesting inventions in this science fiction world space, you also need to focus on the governments that tend to be in control, whether they be an alien species or human government that simply has forgotten its morals. The next type of post-apocalypse is survival stories. Now typically you won't know exactly what caused the apocalypse, but this is the kind of story that tends to focus more on the characters and them surviving afterwards than it is focusing on the before and the steps that brought about it. Examples of this are The Road by Cormac McCarthy and Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. As the name suggests, a survival post-apocalypse story is simply about characters trying to survive in a harsh world space. The focus of these stories tends to be on the strength of human character, the willingness to do great things in the face of overwhelming odds, in order to protect one's values, in order to exact justice, in order to protect those that they care about. Another great feature when it comes to these kind of post-apocalyptic stories tends to be their ingenious ways of surviving, especially if this is a world space where there's very little resources, so everything must be taken advantage of. For example, you can have a character who's very ingenious in the way that they combine certain materials and resources in order to survive. There can be those in this desolate world space, if it is a desolate world space, doing quite well for themselves thanks to their own cunning and genius in taking what little they have and making it work. And this brings us to a similar post-apocalypse, which is an environmental apocalypse. This tends to be a story about an apocalypse which is caused by an environmental disaster, whether it be a new ice age or the world turning into a giant dust ball like Mad Max. These are very interesting in their own right because they present a new world space for your characters to survive in. And many interesting elements can be added to this world space depending on the type of environmental apocalypse. For example, if it is an ice age apocalypse, you have characters trying to survive in a very unique way. You could have characters surviving underground in this icy world space because it's a lot warmer there, or characters on a moving train, There are so many examples out there that you can take advantage of, but that's just one type of environmental apocalypse. You could have a world that has been entirely flooded, in which case people have to survive on boats. Then you've got a sort of Pirates of the Caribbean blend of Mad Max. The major element and advice I would give when it comes to writing this kind of apocalypse is to focus on the unique element that makes your story so interesting. For example, if it is a flooded world space, you can focus on characters and how they build their ships, how they manage their ships, the different factions that could form. Mad Max is certainly a great example of what people get up to in a world space that has turned into dust. Because in Mad Max, they focus on getting water and gasoline, because they need gasoline to overcome those great distances to find more water. That is the balance of power, that is how they survive. So if you're looking to create an environmental apocalypse, decide what you want to do to your world space in order to make sure that people are brought down low to the same level and are trying to survive. And with that in mind, look at your world space and your characters and how they must adapt in order to survive. What changes do they have to make? What skills do they have to pick up on in order to make it in this new world space? After that, we have the post-nuclear war, which tends to be a post-apocalypse that focuses on the remains of humanity fighting a war that never really ended despite the bombs dropping. Now, a great example of this type of post-apocalypse is the Metro series by Dmitry Glukhovsky. I've talked about some of his books already, and I think that they are great examples of a post-apocalypse story in a world space that has been ravaged by nuclear war. And while I have mentioned Metro, I should say that it is typical for most Russian writing, especially post-apocalypse novels, to focus on the philosophical aspects of the world space, not just the interesting aspects of mutant creatures and people surviving underground eating glowing mushrooms. But post-nuclear war tends to offer a lot of the world space that has been left behind only abandoned and irradiated. So there tends to be a lot less people, and you get more I Am Legend aspects of people trying to survive in a city that has been mostly emptied. The focus of these kind of stories tends to be about unity, about community. This is a world space that has been destroyed by disagreements and conflict, and now that there are so few people in this world, they need to unite in order to survive. And this of course means coming to some peace agreements, it means overcoming grudges. And while this isn't always going to be a hunky-dory story of people getting together and everything just working out, this tends to be the focus of avoiding the same mistakes that brought about their current situation. But that really is up to you. When it comes to these kind of stories, I advise focusing more on unity rather than continuing this line of destruction. Even though some characters may want to do that, that shouldn't really be the focus of your story. It should be about rebuilding rather than destroying what little is left. And last but certainly not least, we have the zombie apocalypse. Now, this is a huge genre that has been around for decades. Who hasn't heard of a zombie apocalypse story? We've seen it in movies and in books. It's simply about the undead rising again and turning against the living, either because they have lost their minds, or because they've been corrupted by some evil force, or an insect or fungus, whatever it may be. One aspect of the zombie apocalypse that tends to make it a bit more realistic, even though many argue that zombies wouldn't be able to take over the world, is that the fact that the dead outnumber humans, and sometimes to make them a bit more formidable, we will sometimes add elements to the zombies to make them unique, interesting, and of course be able to take on humanity who is armed to the teeth. Perhaps the dead are actually incredibly durable, and they're incredibly fast, or strong, or a lot more intelligent than they seem. Perhaps this is an apocalypse that caught people at the wrong time, and it took over quickly and efficiently before they could really scramble and do something about it. Whatever brought about the zombie apocalypse is up to you, as well as the abilities of said zombies. You could have the shambling zombies from the Night of the Living Dead, or you could have the super fast and strong zombies from I Am Legend and World War Z. You could also set the story in any stage of the post-apocalypse, be it right after it happens, where you still have so many human survivors, or several years and decades down the line, where it's only a few pockets who have to adapt to this new lifestyle. There are so many ideas that one can come up with, and I do recommend this, because as it is one of the most popular forms of post-apocalypse, it tends to have been overdone in many aspects. So a lot of writers out there are trying to create unique ways to make their zombies a bit different, to make their apocalypse just a little bit more interesting. You can create a truly interesting survivor story or a saving of humanity story in this zombie apocalypse, but it's also important to then focus on what makes your apocalypse different from every other zombie apocalypse. And there you have it, the 5 most popular forms of post-apocalypse and some tips on how to write them. Which one is your favorite post-apocalypse novel to write or read? And what novels would you recommend in that subgenre? Let me know in the comments below. And taking a step away from the post-apocalypse, let's talk about fantasy. If you're interested in reading some of my books, you can find a link to my bookstore in the description below. I have many different books, from fantasy to science fiction to thriller to action adventure. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, be sure to check them out. And as I said at the start of this video, you can grab the first book in my Dust trilogy for free. There's a link to that in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next episode of Writing Today. With that, good day, good night, and happy writing.